Breaking news tonight, an ugly new turn on the longest government shutdown ever after Speaker Pelosi threatened to cancel his State of the Union. President Trump postpones her secret visit to Afghanistan, pulling her military plane at the last minute. A never-ending fight with 800,000 families caught in the crossfire.
We're real families that need a real paycheck that my husband's working really hard for.
Also tonight, Rudy Giuliani's damage control after the president's lawyer tried to move the goalposts.
I never said there was no collusion between the campaign or between people in the campaign.
Yes, you
I have no idea if I have not. I said the President of the United States.
And another bombshell tonight about Michael Cohen, a bag of cash, a rigged online poll, and he's pointing the finger at the president. Two snowstorms about to blanket a huge part of the country starting tonight. Al Roker has the latest forecast. And right now, a frantic rescue operation underway. People buried by an avalanche at an American ski resort. The verdict is in for 3 officers accused of a cover-up after an infamous police shooting. A teenager killed, shot 16 times. The Queen's husband, Prince Philip, in a frightening car wreck, flipping his Range Rover, and authorities say the 97-year-old prince was behind the wheel. And the hotel dishwasher just awarded $21 million by a jury because her boss made her work on Sundays.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. As hundreds of thousands struggle to get by on no pay, the people who could put them back to work seem more focused on power plays and retaliation. President Trump today, in an apparent move to humiliate Speaker Nancy Pelosi, canceled her military transportation for an official overseas trip at the last minute, a day after Pelosi threatened to postpone his State of the Union address because of the shutdown. Moves rich in political theatrics, but hardly amusing to those in the crossfire of this standoff. Our Peter Alexander has details.
Tonight, Democrats grounded, boarded on this bus, but going nowhere. Less than an hour before Nancy Pelosi and others were set to begin a planned trip overseas, including a secret stop in Afghanistan.
We're going to Afghanistan.
President Trump writing the House Speaker, "I'm sorry to inform you that your trip has been postponed," calling it a public relations event, arguing the top Democrat should stay in Washington negotiating with me. The president's move apparent payback for Pelosi's call to postpone the State of the Union address until after the government reopens. Democrats fuming.
I think the actions of the president were petty, mean-spirited, and beneath any president of the United States to take.
The president again today blaming Democrats for not negotiating.
The party has been hijacked by the open borders fringe within the party.
Pelosi's sensitive trip requires military aircraft, which the president controls. Though he suggested today, if you'd like to make your journey by flying commercial, that would certainly be your prerogative. Peter Alexander, NBC News, the White House.
This is Tom Costello, walking a very thin financial tightrope tonight. IRS worker Crystal Kirkpatrick, air traffic controller Tyler Kennard, and TSA officer Tyrone Sharper. Crystal is now selling her own plasma for $50 to support her family.
It's kind of uncomfortable to do it. You're hooked up to that machine. They pull out your blood. They spin out the plasma and they pump it back into you.
Air traffic controller Tyler Kennard and his wife Becky are facing mounting bills, including regular hospital care for 3-year-old Tucker's immune deficiency disorder.
We're real families that need a real paycheck that my husband's working really hard for.
TSA officer Tyrone Sharper and his wife Ebony have a 7-month-old to support.
To say that TSA is important or that national security is important and then not to pay the people that are actually performing service as TSA agents, I think that's not right.
Among the departments and agencies going without funding, Homeland Security, State, Justice, Commerce, Interior, NASA, the EPA, the NTSB, Transportation, Agriculture, Treasury, HUD, and parts of the FDA. In the first 2 weeks of the shutdown, 10,000 furloughed government workers filed for unemployment benefits, while some have gone to extremes.
I mean, desperate times call for desperate measures.
More faces of the shutdown on day 27. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
This is a good time to bring in Chuck Todd to talk about this. What is going on here? What's it going to take to bring the sides together?
Well, normal political pressure isn't working. Right. Normally, you know, the vast middle, there's some sort of political pressure point and it breaks and these things get solved and compromised in the middle. We live in polarized times. Honestly, I think the only thing could do this, and I'm not calling for it, but it's almost a total and complete walkout of the TSA agents at every airport in America or the air traffic controllers. It is going to take something like that, because right now the incentive structure politically in Washington, believe it or not, is the more they've dug in, the more incentive there is to stay dug in. The bases of both political parties want to keep fighting. And so if you want to break the logjam, you have to probably impact every American.
Meantime, it's a crisis in a lot of living rooms tonight.
It's a real crisis. It's not just a political crisis. And that is something I think that the politicians aren't fully realizing.
Chuck Todd. Thank you, Chuck. As the shutdown drama goes from bad to worse, the president's lawyer is doing damage control of his own after Rudy Giuliani went on national TV and appeared to try to move the goalposts on the question of collusion. With more, here's Hallie Jackson.
The president's lawyer is now shifting his story, insisting Donald Trump did not collude with Russia, but leaving open the possibility his campaign did.
I never said there was no collusion between the campaign or between people in the campaign.
Yes,
I have no idea if I have not. I said the President of the United States.
That directly contradicts what the president has said repeatedly about collusion between the campaign he led and the Kremlin.
There was no collusion with the campaign. There was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian people. There has been no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians or Trump and Russians.
Giuliani, asked to explain his stunning comment, says he was not changing his stance, telling NBC News, "I represent the president." He added, "If you say to me tomorrow someone in the campaign colluded with the Russians, well, okay, that person did, but we didn't know about it, and I don't know of any such person." Democrats skeptical.
He appears to acknowledge collusion between the campaign and the Russians. If that's what others have taken from it, that's what I took from it. That's quite an admission by the president's own lawyer.
And do you find that disturbing?
Of course it is.
Giuliani also says the president did not tell his former lawyer to try to rig early online campaign polls. The Wall Street Journal reported Michael Cohen paid a tech firm to try to make Donald Trump look better in polling just before he announced his presidential run in 2015. Cohen today tweeted, "What I did was at the direction of and for the sole benefit of President Trump. I truly regret my blind loyalty to a man who doesn't deserve it." Hallie Jackson, NBC News, the White House.
Tonight, the first of back-to-back snowstorms is about to blanket a big part of the country. Al Roker has the latest forecast. Al, lay this one out for us.
Lester, we've got a quick storm moving across the northeast of New England, dropping about an inch of snow. That's the worst of it. The big storm, though, still is making its way from the west. It is bringing that snow now from Rapid City, Omaha, tomorrow into Chicago. Snow over the plains, gusty winds, low visibility. Then rain develops with this, an icy mix and heavy snow from the Midwest into the northeast later on Saturday. By Sunday, we are looking at heavy snow in the northeast with a rain-snow mix along the coast. We're expecting anywhere from 9 to 18 inches of snow from upstate New York into northern New England, and there's a danger of icing upwards of an inch throughout parts of Pennsylvania into the northeast, and that could cause major power outages. Lester?
All right, Al, we'll get your update in the morning. And right now, a major rescue operation underway after an avalanche buried people under the snow at a ski resort in New Mexico. Gotti Schwartz has late details for us.
Tonight, a frantic search on the highest ski peak in New Mexico.
An avalanche hit Kachina Peak. There's been multiple victims.
It's unclear how many people were buried alive. So far, 2 have been pulled out of the snow, according to rescuers. Local hospitals confirming they've received 2 patients in critical condition. According to the Taos News, crews with avalanche probes and rescue dogs are still searching a snowfield more than 30 feet deep in some places. New Mexico's famed Kachina Peak was once only accessible to expert skiers after an arduous hike. But in 2015, a new lift was installed, giving the public direct access to some of the highest runs in America. The Taos Ski Resort saying earlier this morning, Ski Patrol had been out detonating bombs along Kachina Peak, hoping to prevent avalanches. But tonight, the worst-case scenario as they search for more survivors. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News.
Also breaking tonight, a stunning verdict in Chicago. 3 current and former police officers accused of covering up the 2014 shooting of Laquan McDonald that made national headlines, found not guilty. Rahema Ellis has the fallout.
For the 3 officers, a sweeping victory.
There is a finding of not guilty as to every count.
For the critics of the Chicago Police Department, a stunning defeat.
This verdict lets us know that the blue code of silence is alive and well in Chicago.
Officer Thomas Gaffney, former Officer Joseph Walsh, and former Detective David March, now cleared of charges, they tried to cover up evidence to protect a fellow officer, Jason Van Dyke, later convicted of murder. He's seen on this chilling dashcam video shooting 17-year-old Laquan McDonald 16 times as he walked away.
16 shots! 16 shots!
Protesters were outraged because the video was released 1 year after the fatal shooting and only after a lawsuit. Prosecutors in today's case allege the police reports were written to suggest McDonald was the aggressor, an argument the judge rejected.
These three men were innocent from day one.
Tomorrow, former Officer Van Dyke is scheduled to be sentenced and faces up to 96 years in prison. Rahima Ellis, NBC News.
Overseas now to that big scare for the Queen. Queen Elizabeth's husband, Prince Philip, flipping his SUV, and authorities say the 97-year-old prince was behind the wheel. Our Keir Simmons is in London with more.
Shocked and shaken, according to witnesses, the Duke of Edinburgh was helped from his vehicle, seen here lying on its side, the windshield shattered. In another car, 2 women treated in the hospital for cuts and an arm injury. Witnesses say the 97-year-old was behind the wheel and overturned pulling out of an intersection. The palace saying the Duke was not injured. The Prince and the other car's driver were breathalyzed and passed. The Prince still insists on driving himself and even drove President Obama when he visited the Queen at Windsor Castle in 2016.
And I can report that it was very smooth riding.
Tonight, Buckingham Palace officials are eager to reassure people Prince Philip is unhurt. But relief here is mixed with concern over whether he should still be driving. Lester?
All right, Keir Simmons in London, thanks. And back home, small earthquakes rattled California today on the 25th anniversary of the deadly Northridge quake, resurfacing troubling questions for many. Is California ready for the big one? Miguel Almaguer is there.
The 6.7 Northridge earthquake killed nearly 60 people in Southern California and destroyed tens of thousands of buildings. The damage topped $25 billion. Now, 25 years later, is California better prepared?
Much more ready than we were and not nearly as ready as we need to be. There are still cities in California that haven't even gotten rid of their brick buildings. Buildings that we absolutely know both will fall down and will kill people because they're so heavy.
After the quake, $10 billion was spent retrofitting freeways, but thousands of older buildings, like many in downtown Los Angeles, still desperately need seismic upgrades. Today, scientists warn a 7.8 earthquake on Southern California's San Andreas Fault could bring down 1,500 buildings and kill 1,800 people. 25 years after the big one, many are still living on shaky ground. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Now to an NBC News investigation into a unique and expensive military training program that uses what are called role players and costs you and other taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. But does it actually work? Cynthia McFadden went to the largest military training base in the world.
This anti-American demonstration is brought to you by the Pentagon. That's right. American taxpayers are paying people, many from the Middle East and now citizens, as role players to train U.S. troops. Taxpayers also paid for the village of Ujin. It's not in the Middle East, though it sure looks like it might be. It's in California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert, at Fort Irwin. The village and the role players are all part of what's called full environment training. When we were at Fort Irwin, so were troops from Fort Bliss, Texas, many of them new recruits. Colonel Robert E. Lee McGee, their commanding officer.
If we don't give them an opportunity to be exposed to that here and now, they'll struggle with it for real.
Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Rabashini works here at Fort Irwin preparing various scenarios to train the troops.
If we were making a movie, they're hired to be the civilians.
Yes, ma'am. We script major events, but the individual actions between the soldiers and the civilians, that's not scripted. We can't get that specific.
At Fort Irwin, there are a dozen mock villages, while across the country there are over 200 such sites on 100 military bases.
Our role players will be here
trying to sell their goods.
The largest in the world, here in the Mojave, has more than 500 buildings, complete with 2 mosques.
So is that you causing that smoke over there?
From a Hilltop Control Center, they can pump smoke and audio into the dwellings.
Wow. Look at this.
So can you imagine trying to clear a building with all this smoke?
Okay, and where are the stairs? And I mean, these are all the kinds of combat situations
that they might find themselves
in. It's very disorienting.
The training is designed to make it less so. It's also big business. Every year, thousands of role players earn as much as $50,000 for 20 weeks of employment, actually living in the mock towns without running water for 2 weeks at a time. In a year-long investigation, NBC News has identified a network of 256 companies in 46 states, providing role players and receiving more than $250 million a year in government contracts. But despite the big money involved, there has never been a comprehensive audit by the GAO regarding their effectiveness.
In every possible way, the National Training Center attempts to do its utmost to replicate the conditions that the U.S. Army faces here in the world today.
But the training isn't perfect. After all that money spent on the training, those soldiers we met from Texas were not sent to the Middle East. Tonight, they're in South Korea. Lester?
Incredibly elaborate. Cynthia, thank you. Also had the combat veteran outraged at a major airline after she says she was assaulted in the air. Then the $21 million verdict for an employee forced to work Sundays. Next tonight, the veteran outraged at Frontier Airlines' response after she says a man sexually assaulted her on a red-eye flight. NBC's Katie Beck has her story.
Army veteran Lena Ramsey has fought battles before, but this one is personal.
I'm devastated.
In October, she flew Frontier Airlines. On board, she said she was sexually assaulted by a male passenger sitting behind her.
I kept questioning myself and asking, is this really happening? Is somebody really putting their hands in between the seat touching me?
Ramsey says she soon got up and told a flight attendant who asked her to return to her seat. She expected police to be waiting when they landed, but there was no one there. And she says the flight attendant let the man leave.
So I stayed on the plane while she helped him get off.
She was barely listened to, and the perpetrator was allowed to get off scot-free.
Ramsey tracked down the pilot who put her in touch with police. She and her lawyer also went to the FBI. Tonight, an FBI official tells NBC News they're investigating. In a statement, Frontier Airlines said in part, law enforcement was notified upon arrival of the flight, a report was prepared, and federal authorities were informed. We have and continue to support the FBI in its investigation. With no arrest and no charges, tonight Ramsey struggles to find closure.
I wouldn't wish this upon anybody.
Katie Beck, NBC News.
Ahead for us, the employee awarded millions after forced to work on Sundays. We're back now with the hotel worker that a jury awarded more than $20 million because her boss made her work on Sundays. Here's Kerry Sanders.
For 10 years, Marie Jean-Pierre worked as a dishwasher at the Conrad Hilton in Miami. As a devout Christian, she believes the Sabbath is sacred.
Have you ever worked on a Sunday?
No.
For 7 years, Pierre would swap her Sunday shifts with co-workers so she could attend church. But in 2015, she says her new boss put an end to that. And after Pierre didn't show up for 6 shifts, she was fired. Pierre filed a federal lawsuit against Hilton claiming religious persecution. A 9-member jury awarded her $21 million, but federal law caps the payout for punitive damages at $300,000.
The message to employers and to companies, whether big or small, is that you cannot discriminate based on religious beliefs.
Hilton says the verdict is not supported by the facts of this case. Concessions were made and they intend to appeal. If Pierre gets the money, she says she'll spend it on orphans in her native Haiti. Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Miami.
That's Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt. For all of us at NBC News, thanks and good night. Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.